The sky above the cemetery was a dull gray, as if even the weather understood that something irreplaceable had been buried beneath it. Rows of white chairs were neatly arranged on the grass, filled with people wearing black clothes and quieter expressions. Every whisper carried weight, every sigh felt rehearsed. It was supposed to be a farewell to my father, but standing there, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was also a stage. I hadn't been home in almost 3 years, not because I didn't want to, but because every return had slowly turned into a reminder that I didn't belong in my own family's version of reality. And now, standing at his funeral, I realized nothing had changed. If anything, the performance had only become more convincing. My mother stood at the front, dressed in black lace, her eyes perfectly red in a way that felt almost intentional. She held a handkerchief tightly, but her posture was straight, controlled like someone who knew exactly when to cry and when to breathe. Beside her was my sister. She looked flawless in grief. Her head rested slightly forward, her shoulders trembled at calculated intervals, and every tear seemed to fall exactly when people were watching. I used to think grief was messy. Hers looked rehearsed, and then I saw it the way people looked at her. She was always so close to him. She never left his side. She sacrificed so much. I stood a few steps behind, unnoticed, like a shadow that had arrived too late to matter. No one introduced me. No one asked why I had come. It was as if my absence had already been written into their version of the story. The pastor spoke about my father as a gentleman of integrity, a devoted husband, a loving father who held his family together with patience. Each word sounded polished, almost rehearsed by someone who had never actually seen the fractures behind our walls. I clenched my fingers because I had seen those fractures. I had lived inside them. My sister stepped forward to give her speech. The crowd subtly shifted, attention tightening like a lens focusing on its subject. She took a shaky breath, perfectly timed. "Dad," she began, her voice breaking just enough to sound real. "You were everything to me. You were my safe place when no one else understood me." A soft awe rippled through the crowd. She continued, "You always believed in me, even when others didn't. You protected me, especially in the hardest moments. I felt something twist inside me." That wasn't true, not even close, but the crowd didn't know that. They nodded. Some people wiped their eyes. My mother reached out and gently placed her hand on my sister's shoulder, squeezing it with pride, as if she had just heard the most beautiful truth in the world. I watched it happen, the approval, the validation, the construction of a story that didn't belong to my father, or to reality. And then my mother did something that made my stomach drop. She smiled, and she applauded, slowly at first, then louder. The sound of her hands meeting echoed through the silence like a verdict. Others followed, applause at a funeral, for a story that wasn't real. My sister lowered her head, pretending to be overwhelmed by emotion, but I saw it. The brief flicker of relief in her eyes. She had won them over again. I suddenly felt like I was standing inside a lie everyone had agreed to believe. A relative leaned toward another and whispered, she was truly his favorite child. Favorite? I almost laughed. If they only knew, my father hadn't spoken much in his final months. He had grown quieter, more observant. I remember visiting him once, months before everything collapsed. He sat by his desk, staring at old photographs like he was trying to memorize something before it disappeared. When I asked him if he was okay, he only said, "Truth has timing. Not everyone deserves to hear it immediately." I didn't understand then. Now, standing at his funeral, I felt those words pressing against my chest like a locked door trying to open. Because something was wrong here, not just emotionally wrong, structurally wrong. like a story had been edited after the ending was already written. My eyes drifted toward my mother again. She was still applauding my sister, her expression glowing with pride. She looked victorious, not grieving. That's when I noticed it, a small detail, a flicker of hesitation in my sister's hand when she mentioned protecting him in his hardest moments. Just for a second, but it was there, and it didn't match the rest of her performance. A memory surfaced, unwanted, sharp. My father sitting in his study late at night. The door locked, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating his tired face. He looked up at me once and said quietly, "If anything happens to me, don't trust the loudest voice in the room." At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. Now, I wasn't so sure. A cold wind moved through the cemetery, rustling the flowers near his grave. Someone behind me whispered a prayer. Someone else sobbed. But all I could hear was that applause, my mother's applause, for a story I knew wasn't complete. And somewhere deep inside me, something shifted, because my father hadn't been the kind of man who left things unfinished. He always made sure the truth had an ending, even if it waited for the right moment to arrive. The applause hadn't fully faded. Even after my sister stepped back from the microphone, people were still nodding like they had just witnessed something sacred. Some were wiping tears that didn't seem entirely earned. Others were already leaning toward each other, reinforcing the version of my father that had just been handed to them. Soft, flawless, conveniently simple. And my mother, she looked like she had just watched her favorite story reach its perfect ending. She turned toward my sister and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You made him proud," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. It wasn't just affection. It was confirmation, approval, a stamp on a narrative that was quickly becoming fact. My sister held on to her, letting out a small sob that sounded more practiced than broken. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. No one here was grieving my father. They were reacting to a performance about him. A cousin of mine walked past me and barely acknowledged my presence. "It's beautiful what she said," he murmured. "Your sister really carried the emotional weight of the family." Emotional weight. I almost laughed again, but it caught in my throat. Because I remembered carrying real weight. Late night hospital calls my mother ignored. Arguments that ended with doors slamming so hard the walls shook. Years of being told I was too sensitive. Whenever I questioned what was happening behind closed doors. And my sister, she had always been the one who knew how to stand in the right light. The crowd began shifting toward the reception tent. Conversations grew louder, lighter, as if grief had a schedule and had already clocked out. I stayed near the edge of the chairs, watching. That's when I noticed my mother again. She was speaking to a group of relatives, gesturing toward my sister like she was presenting an award-winning achievement. She never left his side during those final months, my mother said proudly, not like some people who distanced themselves. The words landed directly on me. I felt it immediately, the subtle turn of heads, the silent recalculation of my place in the story. I hadn't even spoken, but suddenly I was the comparison. The absence, the implied disappointment, she stayed when it mattered. My mother added, her voice softer now, almost tender. My sister lowered her eyes modestly, accepting the praise without correction. I should have spoken up. I should have said something, but something in me hesitated, because truth I was beginning to understand wasn't welcome here. It didn't matter what actually happened, it mattered what sounded right. I stepped away before I became part of their conversation entirely. Near the back of the cemetery, under the shade of an old tree, I pulled out my phone and stared at the cracked screen without seeing it. My father's voice echoed in my memory again. "Don't trust the loudest voice in the room." My sister had been the loudest voice. My mother had amplified her, and the room had obeyed. A gust of wind passed through, rustling the folded programs in people's hands. One slipped from a chair and landed near my feet. I picked it up without thinking. On the cover was my father's photograph. Smiling, the same smile I remembered from family dinners, from quiet mornings, from the rare times he seemed at peace. But I also remembered something else, the way that smile faded in his final months, the way he stopped talking directly to my mother, the way he started locking his study door. A memory surfaced sharper this time, me standing outside that door late at night, hearing the soft clicking of a keyboard inside. No music, no TV, just typing. When I asked him what he was doing, he only said, "Documenting things people will deny later." At the time, I didn't take him seriously. Now, I wasn't sure I could afford not to. A sudden burst of laughter came from the reception tent. Life was already restarting around his death. I folded the program and slipped it into my pocket. As I turned back, I saw my mother and sister standing together again. My mother was fixing my sister's hair gently, like she was preparing her for another stage entrance. And then I saw it. My sister glanced at me, just for a second. No sadness, no grief, only something sharp. Awareness, like she knew exactly where I stood in her version of the story, and exactly where I didn't belong. Then she smiled, small, controlled, and turned away. That smile stayed with me longer than it should have, because it wasn't a smile of mourning. It was a smile of confidence, like she believed the story was already finished. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my father hadn't died without leaving something behind, something unfinished, something waiting, and for the first time that day, I stopped feeling like a guest at his funeral, and started feeling like something else entirely. A witness to a story that wasn't done exposing itself yet, the reception hall had shifted into something uncomfortably festive. Soft lights glowed from crystal chandeliers. Tables were arranged with expensive food. No one seemed to fully taste. Conversations floated across the room, about my father, about memories, about how strong our family was being. Strong, I almost hated that word now. My mother stood near the center like a host at her own performance, gently guiding conversations, nodding at the right moments, reinforcing the version of events that had already started to harden into truth. My sister stayed close to her, occasionally dabbing her eyes as if grief still needed maintenance. And me, I was still the quiet corner of the story no one checked twice, until the screen lit up. It wasn't part of the program. That much I knew immediately. The projector at the front of the hall flickered once, then stabilized. A few guests turned their heads, annoyed at the interruption. Someone muttered about technical issues. My mother frowned slightly. "What is this?" She asked one of the organizers. No one answered. Then my father appeared, alive, sitting in his study chair. The room didn't just go quiet. It collapsed into silence so complete it felt physical. My mother froze mid-step. My sister stopped breathing entirely. On the screen, my father looked older than I remembered, thinner, but his eyes were clear. Focused, not confused, not weak, intentional. If you were watching closely, you could tell he had recorded this knowing exactly where it would end up. He adjusted the camera slightly and spoke. "If you are watching this," he began calmly, "then I am gone. And if this is being played at my funeral, then I made the right decision to wait." A murmur spread through the room. My mother took a step forward. "Turn that off," she said sharply to someone near the projector. "This is inappropriate." No one moved. The video continued. My father leaned back slightly. There are things in a family that don't survive grief. They survive silence, and I've spent too many years watching silence win. My sister's hand tightened around my mother's arm. Then came the first file. On screen, documents appeared. Dates, transactions, audio clips, messages. My father's voice stayed steady. Let's start with the claim that my daughter was by my side during my final months. A pause. A recorded hospital log appeared. Dates my sister had publicly referenced. Then CCTV timestamps, different locations. Different cities, the room shifted. People leaned forward without realizing it. My sister whispered something under her breath. My mother didn't respond. My father continued. She was not present during my treatments, not during the emergency admissions, not during the consultations where I was told the truth about my condition. A new clip played. A phone call. My sister's voice. I'm busy right now, Dad. Can we talk later? Later. The word hit harder than any accusation. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Someone stopped eating. My mother's face tightened. This is edited. She said quickly, too quickly. This is not real. But no one agreed. The video kept going. My father's expression darkened slightly, not in anger, but in exhaustion. There is something else you should know, he said, about why I started recording everything. The screen shifted again. Bank statements, signatures, legal transfers. My mother stepped forward now. Stop this, she snapped louder. This is a private matter. But the room wasn't listening to her anymore. It was watching him. And then came the final segment. My father leaned closer to the camera. If you are my family, he said slowly, then you already know who benefited most from my silence. A pause. A breath that felt like it stretched across the entire hall. My wife, my daughter, and the version of reality they carefully maintained. My sister's face drained of color. Then came the recording that broke everything open. A private conversation. My mother's voice cold. Controlled. He won't last long anyway. Once he's gone, everything will be easier. A stunned gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered. My mother turned sharply. That is not what I meant. This is manipulated. But her voice cracked. And cracks are hard to ignore. My father's final words filled the screen, so I built this instead. The screen flashed. A folder labeled, Truth Play at Funeral, and then he added quietly, Let them finish speaking first, then let me speak last. The video ended. Silence didn't return this time. It detonated. People were looking at my mother now, not with sympathy. Not with respect, with something far more dangerous. Reevaluation. My sister stepped backward, shaking her head. No, this isn't. This isn't real. But no one rushed to comfort her. My mother opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. The authority she had built all day, every nod, every applause, every carefully placed sentence was dissolving in real time. And for the first time since I arrived at the funeral, I felt movement in the room shift toward me. Not attention, understanding, because I wasn't surprised. I was watching it like someone who had already read the ending. My father's voice still echoed faintly in my head. Truth has timing, and now the timing had arrived. For a few seconds after the screen went dark, no one moved. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after grief. It was the kind that follows impact when something hits so hard, the mind needs time to decide what just broke. My mother stood frozen near the front, her face still caught between denial and disbelief. My sister was shaking now, not with grief, but with something far less controllable. Fear around them. Guests slowly began to shift in their seats. People who had applauded minutes earlier now avoided eye contact. Conversations that had been so confident earlier in the day were gone, replaced by fragmented whispers. That was a real, no way that can't be true. I heard her say it though. My father's voice still lingered in the room like a ghost that refused to leave politely. My mother finally spoke, but her voice lacked its earlier control. This is an attack, she said quickly, almost desperately. Someone manipulated him. He wasn't well. He didn't understand what he was doing. But no one nodded this time, because they had heard too much, and worse, seen too much. My sister turned toward the guests, her voice breaking. "That's not me. I didn't say those things. I never said that." But her words didn't land the way they had during her speech earlier. Then, slowly, something shifted. All eyes began to drift, not to her, not to my mother, to me. It wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like a tide turning without permission. I could feel it, the realization forming in the room. The quiet reevaluation, the uncomfortable math of memory versus performance. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't defended anyone. And yet somehow I wasn't surprised by any of it. My uncle stepped forward hesitantly. "Did you know?" he asked me directly. The room quieted again. That question hung heavier than all the accusations combined. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at my sister, and I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore, not like I used to be, because anger requires surprise, and I had stopped being surprised a long time ago. "Yes," I said quietly. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed. My mother's head snapped toward me. "You knew," she repeated, sharper now. "And you said nothing." There it was, not grief, not guilt, blame, always redirected when control slips. I nodded once. He told me to wait. That sentence changed the room again. My sister looked at me like I had betrayed her. "You let this happen," she said, voice rising. "You let them see this on his funeral day." I didn't answer immediately, because I remembered something she didn't. My father sitting across from me months ago, sliding a sealed envelope toward me. "If I show them too early," he had said, "they'll destroy it before it's understood. If I show them too late, it won't matter, so I need someone who can wait." I had asked him, "Why me?" And he said, "Because you stopped trying to be believed a long time ago." Now, standing in this room, I understood what he meant. My mother stepped forward again, but her voice had lost its sharp edge. It was softer now, almost pleading. "We are still your family," she said. "Whatever this is, we can fix it. We don't need to humiliate each other like this. Fix it." That word sounded almost insulting now, because nothing about what I had just seen was broken by accident. It had been maintained carefully. My sister suddenly turned toward the guests again, desperation creeping into her tone. "He was confused," she said again. "You have to believe me. He wasn't thinking clearly at the end." But someone in the back spoke up. "A woman I didn't recognize. I think he was thinking more clearly than any of us." That was enough. The room didn't erupt, but it shifted. People started standing, not leaving dramatically, just quietly stepping away from the center of the illusion. Conversations resumed, but differently now, not about my father's strength, but about what they had just witnessed. Truth doesn't spread loudly at first. It spreads like discomfort. My mother realized it too late. She turned toward me one last time, searching my face like she could still find a version of this story where she was right. "You planned this," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "He did." My sister let out a short, broken laugh. "So this is it. This is what he left behind to ruin us." I finally looked at her properly. "No," I said. "He left it to stop the version of him you were building." That shut her down completely. The room was nearly emptying now. Chairs scraping. Soft footsteps. People choosing distance over loyalty. Not because they hated them, but because they could no longer pretend. My mother stood still, surrounded by the collapse of the narrative she had held all day. My sister looked smaller now, like someone realizing the stage she had been performing on was never as stable as she believed. And I just felt quiet, not victorious, not cruel, just done. As I stepped toward the exit, I passed my father's photograph again. Smiling, this time I understood it differently. It wasn't a smile of innocence. It was a smile of timing. Outside, the air felt colder than before. Behind me, the funeral continued to unravel in silence and whispers. But I didn't turn back, because for the first time in a long time, the story no longer needed me to carry its lies forward.